Christie Mulholland. Welcome to the Lean Out podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to talking with you.
Me too. Excellent. So, for those who are not familiar with you, can you please introduce yourself? Talk about who you are, what you do, and how your work life balance is different from other people in your chosen profession.
So, I'm a physician coach, and this is what's really lighting me up right now. I'd start with that. I'm also a palliative care physician and associate professor at Mount Sinai in New York City. I'm the director of the Faculty Wellbeing Champion Program. So, I get to spend lots of my time building programs and initiatives to try and reduce burnout and improve workplace satisfaction. Outside of work, I'm married to James. My husband and I are dinkwads, dual income, no kids, with a dog. And we have a 65-pound pit bull named Brindy who thinks that she's a person. So we take her everywhere with us. Right on cue, there she is in the background. She loves to be included. So a lot of my time outside of work is James and I bringing Brindy on urban adventures and hikes, restaurants too, and trains. James works in the food industry, so he's a chef, and that means that I eat incredibly well. And we also get to go out to lots of amazing New York City restaurants for work, in air quotes.
Nice.
Um, it's fabulous. And a lot of these activities I have a lot more time for than the average physician that's working full time. And this is one thing that I think makes me different from some of my peers is that I no longer work full time for an institution. I'm very part time in clinical medicine. I have basically a zero point 0.3 FTE role, and the rest of the time outside of that is mine. And that is for doing work that matters to me, building my coaching practice, spending time with my family, and just being who I am outside of a white coat.
I didn't know, just as an aside, what dinkwad meant. I knew what dink meant. And I think it's wonderful to have someone on the podcast who does not have children, because we have a lot of moms that come on and we have some men that I interview that are dads. But it's wonderful to hear the perspective of someone who has a slightly different lifestyle. And I love that you brought up the vibrant life that you have in New York City with the restaurants and things like that, because it's very different from where I live. Now, tell me a little bit more about your part-time status and how that came about, because I'm assuming you didn't start out that way straight out of training.
No, absolutely not. I started out, fully on the treadmill of achievement, as you call it. And I was working full time practicing palliative care and really loving it when I started. I felt like I had found my place and I'd want to be there forever. And then something happened around the time that I achieved this huge milestone of being promoted to associate professor. I didn't feel good afterwards. It didn't really make any difference in how I felt about myself. Um, and that was a real turning point for me where I started questioning how I was spending my time and my energy. Over the years, I really noticed myself feeling more and more squeezed by the healthcare system, um, watching the patients be squeezed or having needed care denied, just being asked to do more and more without any increase in compensation, and that spending more time that didn't feel like it was meaningfully benefiting my patients. And that feeling just started accumulating. And it got to the point where I felt pretty disillusioned and pretty crispy around the edges. And I think people around me were starting to notice that. So I really wasn't okay with the kind of energy that I might be putting out. And that told me that it was time to make a change. So I decided that I wanted to take some meaningful time off, not just a vacation, but a significant career pause. And then I wanted to be part-time so that I could start building something that I was passionate about, which was my coaching. I went to my department leadership and presented this idea to them, and they just said, no, that's not a thing. Sabbaticals are only for full professors. So that would mean I'd basically have to come back in 10 years or so.
Mhm.
Um, and the part-time, the version of part-time that I was asking for, there just wasn't a framework for it. So they said no. And after a lot of soul searching and ruminating, I decided that it was important enough that I was going to do it anyway. So what that looked like was I had to resign from my full-time position. And I really didn't want to resign because I wasn't leaving.
Mhm.
I wanted to change the way that I worked there at Mount Sinai. Once I had resigned, a window of possibility opened up, and some people at work that I consider, my allies in the negotiation process, they came to me and they said that they'd like to find a way to have me part-time. So I ended up keeping my administrative position, just 0.25 FTE as the director of the faculty well-being program. And then I'm per diem for palliative care.
It's such an interesting story. And there's so many things I want to say. But first of all, it reminds me of something that happened to me when I left my academic position. I took a sabbatical and they actually let me do it. And when I came back, I went and had a meeting with a department head. And I'm sure you know the feeling. It's just like butterflies. You're like, oh my gosh, how is this going to go? But you're determined. I had written things down on a piece of paper that I wanted to say. And I said, I would like to come back seasonally or very part-time, kind of like per diem. And they said no. So I said, well, I'm giving my 2 months notice then right now, effective immediately. And he said, okay, we will always write you good recommendations. And I accept that. And then later on, maybe a month later or something, the person that does the scheduling actually asked me for an arrangement that was like a per diem type arrangement, which was exactly what I was asking for in the first place. And it wasn't something that was permanent. The understanding was that it was only temporary. But now, when did this happen? Because you have been doing this arrangement for a while. It hasn't been temporary for you.
That's right. It all started over a year ago.
Okay.
Um, and the sabbatical started in June 2025.
Okay. So I want to talk about what you did on your sabbatical, but first, tell me about that meeting. What was going on in your head? How did you make yourself decide that you were going to go and resign? What resources did you tap into internally or externally to make that final decision that was so hard?
So, well, in my case, it was more than just one conversation. There were a handful of conversations. There was my chair, there was my clinical supervisor, and then there were my supervisors with the Office of Wellbeing. So I got to have a few tries to get the conversation right. And looking back, I really wish that I had prepared a little more for some of the conversations because I think I could have made my case more eloquently and, with a more positive framing of what I was hoping for the sabbatical. So the conversations were really challenging. I did try, as I got better and better at having the conversation, I really tried to emphasize how the sabbatical would be meaningful, how it would make me a better doctor, you know, tried to be very diplomatic about why I was feeling this need to step away, letting the people that I was talking with know that it wasn't anything personal. It wasn't anything about them, that I felt that everybody in my work life was doing their best to make the workplace a wonderful place to be. It was just that my needs had changed and the healthcare system, I feel, has changed. And then there was nothing that anyone could do to sort of control. Some of the conversations were a little bit messy, and I wish that I had, I'm someone who gets some tears in my eyes when I'm feeling emotional or anxious, and definitely some of that came up. So, what resources did I tap into? I found a lot of comfort and validation in talking with the people that know me really well outside of work.
Mm.
Longtime friends, family, my husband. Whereas people at work, I think some people had a hard time relating to what I was going through. And that left me feeling strange or different or that I was doing something wrong. But the people who know me outside of work and know me really well had nothing to say but, this is a great idea. We're proud of you. We believe in you. When my husband told me that he believed that I could go out on my own and work for myself, when he told me that he was more afraid of me staying where I was and being unhappy than he was afraid of me, losing some income for a while, taking some risk. So those were the most important resources, were the people that know me as more than just a palliative care doctor at Mount Sinai.
Your point about tapping into the knowledge of people who know you very intimately and not in a work capacity is well taken, because those are the people that matter in your life more anyway.
Yeah. And I really appreciate what you say about the role of coaching in this process. I think for me, I definitely had access to some coaching. I was in a coach training program while I was thinking through a lot of my decisions. And I really wish I would have found a sabbatical coach or a doctor sabbatical coach, which is what I now aspire to be, so that people aren't needing to feel around for themselves and figure out what they might need, but having just somebody who's been through it and can help them navigate the financial, professional, and emotional questions and checkpoints in the planning process.
Yeah. So we've had someone on the podcast before who is a sabbatical expert and coach, and her name is Jillian Johnsrud, and she wrote the book Retire Often. And I will link to that episode from 2025 in the show notes for those who maybe missed it or are interested in listening to that. However, she is not a physician. And so you're bringing to the table something that is new and much needed, I believe, in this space, which is someone who is a physician and who is a coach and who wants to help people navigate sabbaticals or extended periods of time off. So tell me about what kind of considerations someone who wants to do that needs to take into account, like just kind of on a top level basis, like financially, credential wise, things like that.
Yes, I group it into three categories, which are financial readiness, professional readiness, and emotional readiness. And every individual person might be at a different point of readiness for each of those categories. So I think the coaching work and the preparation work sort of depends on where you're starting from. For some people, the emotional aspect, the fear about losing their identity if they step away from their professional role, sorting out true challenges versus things that are more like limiting beliefs. All of that is the work of emotional readiness. In terms of financial readiness, I think that if you're taking a paid sabbatical or a formal sabbatical that's approved, that's the ideal situation. But for many of us that are more like a DIY sabbatical, you need to calculate how much you're going to need. And I encourage people to start a sabbatical savings account and call it that, and start contributing to it well before you need that sabbatical. Just think ahead. If you think you might someday want one, just start saving for it and name it as that. I relied a lot on some financial independence type of calculations. Coast Fi was very helpful for me, the concept of coasting to financial independence, which basically means that, you have enough invested in your retirement accounts that those investments will continue to grow and they will be enough by the time you reach your desired retirement age. So then that gives you the option where you could work less starting now, knowing that you don't need to contribute to retirement anymore. Coast Fi was a milestone for me that I had reached. And while it didn't give me 100% comfort taking an unpaid sabbatical, it did give me the permission on paper, that I had enough. And then for the professional readiness, there might be some practical considerations. Who's going to take care of your patient panel while you step away? Who are you going to hand off your research responsibilities or your grants to? How do you have those negotiations? And what's the technique? What's the strategy of negotiation that you're going to use? How do you identify your allies? So that's kind of a high level overview of what I consider conceptually as the three categories of readiness.
Excellent. And I love that you brought up Coast Fi. And for the record, I do want to make clear that the sabbatical I took when I was in a faculty position was also unpaid. It wasn't a traditional sabbatical by any means. What you described in the beginning, where you said, well, it's a full professor and they have to have been at the university for a period of time, and then they take this sabbatical and they're actually actively usually doing some sort of research or professional development, and then they come back and then they have to incorporate it into their workplace in some way, or they're teaching on that new subject or new thing that they learned. That is the more traditional sabbatical. What we're talking about here is basically doing what you want for a period of time. And what is it that you spent your time doing when you took your sabbatical?
So my sabbatical had three North Stars, as I call them, or really three phases of the sabbatical. And actually, thank you for mentioning Jillian, because I found her podcast kind of late in my planning process. And it helped me to give some purpose to the time away on the sabbatical so that I wouldn't just feel like anxious waking up every morning. So the first phase of my sabbatical was about family and nesting. I got married at the beginning of my
Mm.
sabbatical. James and I had a wedding in Hawaii on the beach, and then we honeymooned in Maui. And then we came back to New York. We went to Dallas and picked up the dog, Brindy. His dad had been watching her. We drove her across 9 states in 2 days. And then I spent the month really settling her in and bonding with her, getting used to the new routines of being a dog mom. The second phase of the sabbatical was about being in nature. I had really craved getting out of New York City. It was feeling very claustrophobic to me. So I rented a cabin on a lovely creek in the Catskills and spent a month there just being in nature and having slow, quiet mornings with coffee, going on hikes, going to the farm stand, going and sitting on a dock, just sitting for a few hours with a dog and looking out at the lake. So that was really restorative, and it just really helped me to slow down my pace of my days. And then the third chapter was about launching my coaching practice, Reclaim Physician Coaching. I had finished up my coach training, and I was really eager to get to work building a website, and designing my programs that I now have to share with your listeners.
That is awesome. I love the idea of just imagining the different phases, and they're all very different too. And they require downtime. I mean, you can't just fit those things, any of the three things that you described, into a super busy life where maybe you're taking call or you're working more than 40 hours a week, then like all of the things, your tasks that need to get done during the week because you don't even have time for them. So, how do you fit in time for something like going out in nature and wanting to slowly sip your coffee and wake up to the sunrise and have it be on your face for the first 2 hours of the day or things like that. So those are wonderful. And thank you for sharing that with us. And I want to know a little bit more about now that you're back from your sabbatical, what your current work-life balance is like. How often are you going into an office? How often are you seeing patients? And then you're mixing in some client work, probably remotely as well.
Yeah, a lot of my work right now is remote. Even some of the work with the faculty well-being program at Sinai is remote because we are a multi-site campus and it's an inclusive program. So in order to connect with everybody, a lot of that work,
Mhm.
ironically enough, is virtual and it's not in an office, although we do, as a team, intentionally plan on-site days and retreats where we come together in person when it's meaningful to do so. So I really appreciate the team designing, the program to be that way. I work clinically here and there where it's needed. That is a work in progress. I hope someday to be on more of a predictable per diem schedule. But as for right now, an example of when I worked a lot clinically at the hospital was there was a nursing strike recently, which left some coverage gaps. So I was there to help, and actually it felt really great that I could choose to say yes to that request to be there and help during the strike when I knew that there was a real need for me to be there, and it felt very purposeful and I was excited about it. The rest of the time as a self-employed coach, I'm not necessarily working less. I am, very energetically working on building something valuable for my clients and building my client panel. So that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. So it doesn't actually feel that I'm working less right now because I am working a lot. But the difference for me now is that I decide what's worth my energy and what's worth my time. And if we have a stretch of a couple of sunny days like we had in New York, last Monday and Tuesday, I canceled work on those days and I just took the dog on some long walks and sat in the sun. And I have the luxury of being able to do that now. And that was really what I dreamed of, was that I would call more of my own shots and decide where my energy needed to be every day.
What I'm hearing from that is that you took an element of what you did on your sabbatical and figured out how to integrate it into your life now, which is beautiful. Can you tell me other things that you learned about yourself or about what you want on your sabbatical? What did it do for you besides relaxation and renewal?
I love framing and the meaning that you just gave to how I brought some of my sabbatical back with me into my work life. I really appreciate that, and I will hold on to that. Um, I learned about myself on my sabbatical. I think I remembered something about myself, which was that I'm an adventurous person. And I actually realized that I have a history of taking career breaks. Starting in my 20s, I took a year off from my first job out of college, which was a social work job. And I went to South America and taught English and did some freelance translation and backpacked around the continent. I had no money, but I had no fear, and I just did it. And so taking this step away from medicine and taking this sabbatical was so much harder than that career break was in my 20s. But I did remember that part of myself existed, and it came back to life, that there was a part of me that's fearless, and seeks adventure and kind of enjoys going out into uncharted terrain and making do on my own resources and capability, and that I could have fun in that way again.
I love that because medicine, I think it really beats some stuff out of us. You end up forgetting certain things about yourself, like your deep passions. Maybe you played an instrument, maybe you played a sport, and there is just not time for that when you are in your training. And so you tend to start forgetting things, and those are more overt. Then there's these kind of covert things about your personality, like you're bringing up, said something like, I used to be adventurous. I love the idea that taking a prolonged period of time off can help you to remember some of those aspects of yourself that are still there, but that have just been quieted for so long.
Absolutely. And I think medicine it's a culture where you're really all in or you're all out.
Mm.
And that gets trained into us along with everything else we learn, right? Like how to take a history and do a physical. It gets trained into us that medicine comes first and that it's meant to be all consuming.
Yeah. And I want to just modify something you just said, which is the all in or all out. I think that that is really the assumption. That's the rule that we get taught. But I mean, that's exactly why I named my book and my podcast Lean Out, because you're not all out. You're just leaning. You're just leaning out. You're still there. You can still be a professional. You can still do fulfilling work in medicine, in high octane professions while doing it in your own way. And you have really demonstrated that.
It's really beautiful that the name, the concept, and the fact that you're normalizing this for doctors and reminding people that there's space in medicine for all of us that want to be there.
Thank you. And I'm really excited to have you come into the physician coaching space, offering some non-traditional coaching. I mean, coaching in itself takes a level of consciousness and a level of courage in order to seek that out and to go through some of the difficult learning and relearning about yourself that you need to do when you hire a coach. And now you are applying this to doing something that a lot of people don't do, which is taking time off in medicine. Is there any last bit of advice that you would like to give to listeners who are thinking about doing something like this, who would like to break from the norm, take a period of time off, but they're just worried about what will be said, about being told no, or what other people will think?
I think if anyone is listening to this and thinking that the idea of a sabbatical sounds really nice, but just completely unrealistic, my message to you would be, you might be right. It might be unrealistic to take a break from medicine, to take a sabbatical. But when has that ever stopped you before? It might have been unrealistic to get into medical school or match into your specialty or do the heroic work that you do for patients every week. So unrealistic doesn't have to mean impossible. If you believe that taking an intentional break might be what you need to feel whole, to reconnect with yourself and to re-envision maybe what your career will look like going forward in the next chapter, there's support for you out there. I'm offering myself as support. I am launching right now new sabbatical coaching programs. This is specifically designed for physicians that are thinking about taking a sabbatical. I'm on a mission. I want to help 7 doctors take a sabbatical in 2027. So if you're even just thinking about this, reach out, have a chat with me. You can take the sabbatical readiness quiz. You'll find it on my website. I think that you'll hopefully share that in the show notes. It's reclaimphysiciancoaching.com. Just get a sense, take a 3-minute quiz and see how ready you might be to take a sabbatical.
I love this. I didn't know you had a quiz to offer, and that is wonderful. I've been thinking about doing a quiz myself, but I haven't gotten to it. So I'm excited to go check it out, even though I'm not one of the people that necessarily needs
Yeah,
the sabbatical. But
I would
I'll
love that.
I'll make sure to share this with everyone. And thank you, Christie, so much again for coming on the show and for sharing your story and all the things that you've learned.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so lovely.